Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in tonight. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, the Miami Book Fair, Florida International University's Cuban Research Institute, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Dr. Susannah Rodríguez Drissi in conversation with Dr. Vanessa Garcia to discuss her new novel, Until We're Fish. In Until We're Fish, Susannah Rodríguez Drissi investigates the complicity between Cuba's Americana and the 1959 Cuban Revolution to reckon with the emotional, psychological, and historical forces that drive Cubans away from their island. Though a work of fiction to help shape her novel, the author reached deep into her real family's feelings of love and bitterness for what they left behind in Cuba. To introduce the author and moderator this evening is Dr. Jorge Duany. Dr. Duany is the director of the Cuban Research Institute and professor of anthropology at Florida International University. He has published extensively on Cuban and Caribbean migration, ethnicity, race, nationalism, and transnationalism. His latest book is Picturing Cuba, Art, Culture, and Identity on the Island and in the Diaspora, which was presented at Books and Books last year. We'll have some time to take audience questions after the talk, so please go ahead and put in your questions anytime during the broadcast by using the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. You can order your copy of Until We're Fish from Books and Books below by pressing the green button at the bottom of the screen. Every purchase you make keeps Books and Books up and running, so we thank you. You can also press the donate button anytime, and any amount is welcome. Indie bookstores need your help now more than ever. Remember, October is the new December, so shop local and shop early this year. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Duany to the stage. Hello.
Thank you, Cristina, and thank you everyone for being here tonight, and welcome to the virtual presentation of the book Until We're Fish by Susannah Rodríguez Drissi, who will be talking with Cuban-American author Vanessa Garcia. We're delighted to continue our extensive series of book presentations in collaboration with Books and Books, which aims to bring to light some of the best and most recent work on Cuban and Cuban-American topics. And now I'm happy to introduce our guest author tonight, Susannah Rodríguez Drissi, who is an award-winning Cuban poet, writer, playwright, translator, director, producer, and scholar. I wish I were all those things when I grew up. Born in Bauta, Cuba, she came to the United States at the age of 9 with her parents. She earned her PhD in comparative literature from the University of California at Los Angeles and her MA in interdisciplinary studies from California State University, Long Beach. She also holds a BA in comparative literature from California State University at Long Beach. She has taught in the Department of Comparative Literature, writing programs, and the Academic Advancement Program at UCLA, and is an affiliate scholar of the UC Cuba Program Initiative. Dr. Rodríguez Drissi is also the associate editor of the digital journal Cuba Counterpoints. She's currently at work on her book manuscript, Moorish Cuba. She has published numerous academic essays in edited volumes such as Reading Cuba, Discurso Literario en Geografía Transcultural, published in 2018 and edited by Alberto Sosa Cabanas, and Un Pueblo Disperso, Dimensiones Sociales y Culturales de la Diáspora Cubana, published in 2014, edited by yours truly. Her poems, short stories, creative nonfiction, and reviews have appeared in several anthologies and journals. She's the author of the poetry collections, The Latin Poet's Guide to the Cosmos, and Rey y Atena, a bilingual edition in 2009. Until We're Fish is her first novel, which has already been nominated for several literary prizes. Susanna lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 2 daughters. I'm also glad to introduce our conversant, I guess we can call her, Vanessa Garcia, who will be engaging in dialogue with Susannah about her novel. Dr. Garcia is a distinguished Cuban-American novelist, playwright, journalist, and artist. Her debut novel, White Light, was published in 2015 to critical acclaim. Her plays have been produced in many cities around the world, including the Cuban Spring in 2014, The Crocodile's Bite in 2015, Jenna and the Whale in 2020, and Amparo, an immersive hit that we celebrated with a panel discussion earlier this year at FAU. Vanessa's work has been featured in several anthologies of contemporary literature, such as the recent Let's Hear Their Voices, Cuban-American Writers of the Second Generation, published last year, edited by Iraida Lopez and Eliana Rivero, which we presented as well at Books and Books earlier this year, and Identidad y Postnacionalismo en la Cultura Cubana from 2009, edited by Laura Alonso Gallo and Belén Rodríguez Murelo, also launched at Books and Books. As a journalist, feature writer, and essayist, Vanessa's pieces have appeared in numerous publications such as the LA Times, the Miami Herald, the Guardian, the Washington Post, and the Huffington Post. Vanessa holds a PhD in English from the University of California at Irvine, an MFA in fiction from the University of Miami, and a BA in English and Art History from Barnard College. Our plan for tonight's event is first to hear a conversation between Susanna and Vanessa for about 40 minutes. Then we'll open the floor for questions and answers from the audience for approximately 15 minutes. And as Cristina mentioned, you can ask your questions as we hear their conversation, and they'll address them later on. And also, as Cristina mentioned, let me remind you, you can purchase a copy of Susanna's novel by clicking on the appropriate button also at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, I give you Susannah Rodríguez Drissi and Vanessa Garcia.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you, and I'm so happy to be here, even virtually. We all miss being in the bookstore, but it's so nice to share this book, which is such a beautiful book. I mean, look at the cover; it's so lovely. I'm gonna give just a little bit of a background about the book, really short, super short, just to ground us, and then we'll start talking about it. So this book is about Elio, Pepe, and Maria, right? Which we'll get to know a little bit in our conversation, but it's also about Cuba. It's the story of a boy named Elio who is coming of age and falling in love just as the Cuban Revolution hits. As the country longs for change, Elio also longs. One object of his desire is a Schwinn bicycle, and the other is Maria. As the story opens, Elio is out fishing for gobies, these little fish to give to Maria, and he's attacked by a shark. The shark comes in just as the rebels are about to hit Havana, and another boy named Pepe saves Elio. In the saving, they become very good friends, and it just so happens that Elio and Pepe are in love with the same girl. Elio gets the girl, but this is complicated because this is a story that has Quijotes and Sancho Panzas and Dulcineas, and it's incredibly rich. I mean, you could see how many things I marked over here. But Susanna, I wanted to start with you a little bit in terms of there are many kinds of Cuban stories. There's many kinds of Cubans, Cuban Americans, Cubanos born on La Isla, American born Cubans, Cubans from Jersey, from Miami Cubans. Even the question itself holds the multiplicity of the answers, that you can tell. But before we get into the story that you're telling, can you tell us a little bit about, where in Cuba you come from, how and when you left the island, and how you came to writing?
Sure. First, of course, thank you, Vanessa, for accepting my invitation to converse, and to Jorge and Cristina Books and Books, and the Cuban Research Institute. So indeed, there are so many stories about Cuba. My story in particular takes place, or begins rather, in Bauta, a small town in the outskirts of Havana. It's actually where the novel takes place, and also where many of my plays take place. For example, a lot of my work takes place or begins from Bauta, even as characters disperse into other spaces. I was born there. We left in 1981, so shortly after the Mariel boat left. And unlike other Cubans who left through the Mariel boat left, and for example ended up in Miami, we had the opportunity to go to Costa Rica, which was the country that would accept us at that time. And so in 1981, we left to Costa Rica. We were supposed to be there for about 3.5 years. Instead, we ended up, we were supposed to be there for about 3.5 months, and instead we ended up being there for 3.5 years. So we were there for a bit. I'm very, very thankful for that experience. As a matter of fact, I'm in the process of writing a piece about that, which I've never done before. So it's been really a treat to remember what Costa Rica was like. And then we came to the US and we arrived in 1984. In the middle of, the New Wave, Duran Duran, Echo and the Bunnymen, all of these wonderful bands that were around at the time. And my job really was to memorize as many songs as I could, so I could, I could join the crowds, right? And that's it. That's pretty much as simple as that. We left Cuba, went to Costa Rica. From Costa Rica, we came here. To look forward to any discussion about triangles in this story, I have always been very aware of triangles, in terms of, these 3 countries that were very meaningful for me, or in my own story, for example, there's also Spain. So, as many Cubans or other Latin Americans have a connection to Spain. So there's always the third country, the third wheel, the third character sort of lurking in the shadows.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned music, and it feels so much a part of your writing. Apart from the lyricism itself, it just feels embedded in the actual writing. So it makes sense that that's part of your response. And I love that. And I also love that this is about a story. We feel there's so many stories about Cuba that are centered in La Habana. And it feels like, sometimes those are not stories written by Cubans and sometimes they are, but it's wonderful to get another place and to really live in that place for a while. The other thing that you do really well is you really talk about how these characters have this desire to leave the island, and also how incredibly difficult it is. Immigration is a huge topic for us. Obviously, this is an election year, and we talk a lot about the particular relationship between Cubans in the United States in terms of immigration. Many of them would call themselves refugees, not immigrants, but it's so hard to leave a homeland. And I don't think that makes it into that conversation. And you have that really well in there. Can you read us a little bit about Maria, who has the greatest desire to leave the island, and what that actually feels like?
Right. So I want to say something before I read that, just to sort of respond to what you said in terms of leaving and versus staying. And I think one of the things that have marked my writing and marked me in particular, and many Cubans and immigrants who leave as children, is the inability to choose to leave. So, there has always been a difference between those who choose and who choose as adults, even when the choice is not necessarily easy, and those who cannot choose, such as children, for example, or the elderly. In these days, I think for Cubans, most Cubans, I'm safe, I think, generalizing, don't want to leave their country. We leave because we have to. And so, and that's true of many immigrants. So this is the case also for these characters who are put in such a situation where they feel like they have to leave, or feel like they have to resist leaving. Let's see. This one, Vanessa, are you referring to?
When there's a portion on 120.
120. Yeah. Okay. So this is Maria speaking, and this is 1980 precisely, right after the sort of the height of the Mariel boat lift. And she says, "I'll get out, Elio Perez, I swear it. Whether they permit us to leave freely or I have to swim away all the way to Chicago in the middle of the night. Bound, gagged, or blindfolded, I'll leave. Am I to assume that you wouldn't leave with me? Elio knew her face, and something about it was different. He remembered the surprising effect foreign photographs, always in color, had on him, or the smell of Cuban exiles newly returned to the island, the ones from Miami and California and Texas, the ones who came in vuelos de la comunidad in search of brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers left behind, with the smell of new rubber and deodorant, and face powder clinging to their skin. Elio could always tell who had come back to visit the island from abroad and who had never left the island. It was like what happened to Berto at the end of the block. Half his face collapsed after a stroke, except with the stayed for good Cubans, it was the whole face, not just one side. Perhaps it was the sun, but perhaps it was something else, like something in the water. I won't leave Cuba, he said, quickly offering her a corner of the tablecloth. She whispered something. Elio wanted to quiet her. He couldn't bear the sight of her falling apart right in front of him. He dried her eyes, her nose, her mouth, brushed her hair away from her face. She rested her head gently on his chest, bursting into tears again.
Yeah, that's really, it's really beautiful. And I think one of the things that you do there is that, you know, tourists and people that have gone to Cuba maybe once or twice, there's always this comment of, oh, the Cuban people are so joyful, they're so wonderfully happy. And for me, when I go to Cuba, I just experience and feel and see that sadness that you described so perfectly, that tired, worn down sadness that you describe in that sentence that you hardly ever get to see or feel in writing about Cuba. I also, I mean, talking about this character that really, really wants to leave, I mean, her grandmother made her promise that she would never leave. And then almost as if by a curse, she marries someone who refuses to leave the island. So what is it about Elio that, why won't he? Maria really wants to leave. What is it that ties him and that he just won't?
So I think, you know, there are several things going on for Elio, right? There's the shark that is really more than a shark. There's a sphere of water, you know, water that surrounds everyone in an island. And so the shark, for me, represents that kind of threat, you know, the threat of the unknown in the water. And so there's that, you know, the physical threat of the shark, the symbolic threat of the water and the shark. And also, he doesn't want to be like his father. You know, his father leaves, and, you know, it's his greatest heartbreak, really. And so he wants to do the opposite of what his dad does, and tries. I think he has the ability, more so than Maria, he has the ability to imagine, to dream, to be able to, even if it's crazy plans, right? He has the genes that he wants to manufacture, the fake genes, the lead genes, then the tallest bicycle on the island, or at least the tallest bicycle in Bauta. You know, I don't think he makes it to the island, but he always has something going, some kind of, not necessarily a scheme, because he's not a schemer, but he tinkers with things, and he wants to, he creates plans for himself, you know, so I think that keeps him going. And so he doesn't necessarily have to leave to be able to see the next day. For Maria, so in that sense, he's more of the Don Quixote, right? He's the dreamer, the idealist. Maria is much more practical, much more of a realist, even though she begins as a dreamer. She's also a great reader. She loves romantic stories. And she's a lover of Madame Bovary, who herself is a reader and a lover of romantic stories. So there are all of these layers of dreamers inside books and other books. And in the case of Maria, you know, sadly, I think for me, that's heartbreaking that she ultimately puts those books behind and becomes bitter and a realist in many ways. But she's also very practical. She knows that in an island where there's absolutely nothing, you can't really dream if you're worried about you don't have any food on the table. And so, at the moment, for example, when he starts collecting fish and he's bringing fish home, she's thinking, wonderful fish, I'm going to get to fry some fish, right? And he says, no, they're not for eating, right? So even though they're starving, it's the middle of the special period in times of hunger, So, so she's practical, she's practical, and she knows for her, she sees the only possible way out is the way out, to leave. Yeah.
It's that moment where she gets rid of her books or just puts them behind her totally resonated with me, because my stepdad talks about his library in Cuba so vividly, his tia's library. And when I went to go visit her, there were no books anywhere. And she just said, un día me cansé de ello y lo boté por la ventana, y los tiré todo por la... And she just, I threw everything out the window. I threw all the books out the window. I got so sick of it. And I just, that moment was so, like, I've heard people tell me that.
Yeah, I mean, who has time for books, right? That reading is a privilege, really, right? And so, people who are poor, people who are trying to survive the next day don't have time to read or intellectualize or idealize very many things,
Yeah, and this is an island that is damp, and they collect mites, and it's hard to keep, and you get
right.
It's there's a lot of the dream and the reality in that tossing away of the books. But I always read the acknowledgements, and I noticed that you write to Maria and Elio, whose presence in my life is inextricable from the story. Is there a real Maria and Elio, and how close are they to this?
So absolutely, everyone here is real. I think I hope that I don't write anything that's not real. And so these people had actual real people who held the same name in Bauta, and it was my great aunt, Tia Maria, and she was and her husband Elio, who's also my political uncle, mi tía político, and they were people that begged in many ways to be written down, whose stories, and this is all fictionalized. This is not to say that I gave them the stories that I thought they would have liked, and the stories that I didn't know. I didn't know too much about them. I never got to see them again, and so the little bit I knew that I used to hung around Elio with his fish, and he made or built makeshift aquariums, with bicycle tires, and in the same way that it happens in the book. And my Aunt Maria hated the fact that the house smelled like fish, and it was full of these material, this kind of thing. But she was also very tolerant and very wonderful. She spoke some English. She was very, very smart. They had traveled to the U.S., so there was always sort of, El Norte calling in some way. And, she worked at the telephone company. And she was also practical, very practical. There's a scene in the novel where I think during the Mariel boat lift, right before they have the repudiation rallies come to the house, where Elio comes in and she's cutting the tips off her tennis shoes, just to let her toes air, and my Aunt Maria was just like that. It was practical. Her feet felt hot and she cut the tips off. It was just as easy as that. And so they're very real. The stories, of course, are fictionalized, but there's nothing truer than fiction. I agree. Yeah. So the book is about, some truth. It may not have been word for word their real story, but everyone here is real. When Elio gets, they're chasing him down the hill, and he's on the bicycle and he gets beat up, That's sort of my dad. The repudiation rallies were the rallies that we experienced. We hid under the bed. So, there's nothing here that in some way I didn't experience or didn't live, read and live in our own skin. Yeah.
And you feel it. It feels real. It feels like you're riding through this book on a bicycle,
Thank you. Thank you. It was, I want to say that I wrote it, it was sort of a channeling. I have to tell you, I mean, that's how I felt. It was sort of, I would go in every morning and every night and get, walk into this world feeling very vulnerable and writing with emotion, so that means a lot to me for you to recognize that and say that you do feel it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And on top of that, all the literature and the symbolism that Maria tosses out makes its way into the narrative, which is really lovely. We've talked about Quixote, who is everywhere in this book. And then there's the bicycle. There's this motif of the bicycle that you start out, and here's this Schwinn, this American Schwinn in the 1950s that Elio wants more than anything. It's just out of reach. It's gorgeous. And then that completely just is totally out of reach and disappears, and is replaced by the almost in reach Russian bike, which is not as great, but it's still hard to get. And then that's going to explode, down the road when you're riding it. I know. And then the Chinese bicycle. And so we get the history of Cuba, at least from 1959, through this bike, through this desire, actually, for this bike that either when you receive it it's not enough, or and I'm just thinking, what's the impulse for that symbolism in the book? I love it.
Thank you. So I'll start by mentioning a song that I love, and I'll tell you why I love it. And it's a song by Carlos Vives, the Colombian, and Shakira, right? And that's La Bicicleta, or the bicycle. And Shakira, who has left, and she's lives in the diaspora now, married to Piqué. She hasn't come back to Colombia at all, and she asks someone who's still very close to the land, still very close to the barrio, to take her on the bicycle. And I have always loved that song. It made me cry when it came out, because I feel like that about the bicycle. Small towns are meant for bicycles. The barrio, it's meant for a bicycle. You can't really get to know the people or get to know the town in a car. A bicycle is slightly different. It's better than walking and better than being in a car. And for many countries, especially our countries, our little islands and our countries in Latin America, the bicycle is usually the very first car. There's never a car. It's the only car ever. For some people. For us, my dad had a bicycle, and before my little sister was born, he would put my mom. I think my mom would sit on the handlebars. I would sit in the bar, the center bar, and he would ride like that to the beach. He always says, I must have had some really strong legs to make it all the way to the beach like that. And then when my younger sister was born, then there were 4 of us on the bike. And, they were also a treasure. They were very hard to come by. There's a wonderful novel by our sister writer, Achille Bejas, called Ruins, where there's also a bike. And so bikes are very special. I think even here for children, when you first give your child a bike, or when you first learn to ride a bike, it's something so special. It's the very first time that you usually go off on your own. That very first moment of independence. And for Elio, it means everything. It's not even so much, of course, it's symbolic that it's an American bike and it's the one that he can't have. And he can't have it pre-1959, and he can't have it post-1959. And to me, that's telling of what has and hasn't changed, right? didn't get anything or who were on the margins before 1959 continue to be on the margins after 1959. So the bike is that bridge, right, for me. And, you know, it changes. It changes. And what's wonderful, when he can't get it, he says, you know, to hell with it. I'm going to build my own bike out of these spare parts, which, you know, people do. And he does that. But Maria, the ever practical human being that she is, she makes him tear it down, because what would the neighbors think? You know, if he's dreaming too big, right? And so the bicycle is all of those wonderful things that we dream about. I think when we're kids. I myself wanted a bike. I got a Soviet tricycle instead. And I think it was on the first ride out that it lost the front wheel or the side wheel. And one of Maria's children, my cousin, she wanted a bike for him as well. And, you know, it was a big deal back then. As you know, you can't just, and today, you can't just go to the store and get what you want because it's not there. So, you know, yes, it's about an American bike and this desire for the northern neighbor, but it's really about desire, period, about the things that we can't have and we dream about as children, and we continue to dream about as adults, and that in many ways keep us going. Yeah, you know, they take us on a journey. Yeah. And you feel that when he makes that giant bike that I wanted to see so badly, I wanted him, you know, to finish and ride the thing. It felt so huge, you know, like this Quixote horse, like finally, you know, that's a beautiful moment. And I also see it as like these two, you know, I see the triangle that you're talking about at the beginning of this conversation. These two wheels and the person's always riding it, and these three characters, Pepe, Maria, and Elio, and they kind of switch roles, you know, they kind of like do this rotation. Yeah. And you feel the bike taking them, and they change as they go, and they adapt. I want to take us a little bit to the beginning of the book when Emiliano, I think is the name of the nurse, right? Yeah. Okay, so the Elio gets attacked by a shark, and he's in the hospital, and there's this one nurse who's very loving, and but he seems to know something that nobody else is picking up on, and everybody else is very excited. The rebels are about to come in. There's at least hope for something. We're nearing January 8th. They're about to hit Havana. Everything is Elio's mother is extremely excited, and Emiliano says, the problem is that I only half believe those do-gooder mountaineers are right. The other half tells me we're in for a long ride. All those beards and battle dresses make me cringe. You know what I mean? And that immediately made me think of, I don't know, have you read this book on tyranny? It's so good. This book is excellent. Everybody has read this, but this one, you know, there's it feels like Emiliano is the person to pick up on this, and I'm gonna ask you know why he has that, but be like sixth lesson of you know on tyranny. Be wary of paramilitaries. When the men with guns who have always claimed to be against the system start wearing uniforms and marching with torches and pictures of a leader, the end is nigh. When the pro-leader paramilitary and the official police and military intermingle, the end has come. So Emiliano seems to say, yeah, but you know, I don't trust this, and we're in for a long ride. What is it about that character that can sense that? So Emiliano is someone who, and Elio picks up on this when he walks in. He says he's never known that nurses could be male, right? So he's already someone who is breaking gender norms in a sense, right? He is a male nurse. He's also gay. And I think he picks up on the threat of this hyper-masculinity and this militarization of the country, the excessive body hair and the testosterone, you know, the kind of I won't say toxic masculinity, I promise. But the kind of, hyperbole that masculinity has become. And so he feels that as a threat, and it should be him to feel it, because, men like him are not going to have a very good time later on. And so he foresees that. He feels that on his own skin. And many times we do that, right? Our body tells us something's wrong. Something's not quite right. And so for Emiliano, that's the case. He even, he has that Mickey Mouse watch. And, once again, Mickey Mouse, yes, it's the North once again, but it's also imagination. It's also this little mouse that could. And so Emiliano is someone who is not going to do very well in the confines of revolutionary ideology as it manifests on the island for the next decades.
And then as soon as Elio leaves, the changes begin to happen, but they happen very gradually. And I think that that's something that's also very real about this book. It isn't this like boom, cool, it turns everything on its head, everything. That's not how tyranny works. That's not how dictatorships work. It's a slow process of change that
it's a slow burn.
Yeah. And some people don't realize what's happening. There's your characters all change. You mentioned like all good narrators, Maria, who becomes this very pragmatic person. And I wonder if you can share a little bit of that. There's this moment, and I have it on 224, on 224, of her, and her noticing the way that she herself has changed as a kind of mirror in a way to the country itself.
Okay. Put the glasses back on because I started off my last reading without the glasses, and I was like, what can't I see? Okay. This is, when Maria was a little girl, she rushed into everything. Typewriters and sewing machines propelled her forward. Life was in books and imaginary landscapes. She swooned at shapes in the clouds, at rain falling onto asphalt, at her own body. She looked out to her lagoon and saw such different things, heard music in the chirping of crickets and fireflies. But at some point, she woke up and life no longer had that special hurry. Perhaps that was old age, perhaps it was something else, just like her body no longer remembered that fucking was good, real good, that an orgasm was like a warm gushing of stars. She no longer dreamed, and if she did, she didn't remember. Just like she didn't remember her keys or her wallet sometimes, because she'd lost desire along with her good looks and her dreams and her books and everything else. Life broke her, not in a big way, but one hairline fracture at a time. She sometimes fancied herself without Elio, and that day she fantasized about. She was truly herself. She imagined that she walked out the door, that she got on a plane and never came back, but it was useless because at her age, without children, without any skills, other than connecting and disconnecting telephone cables, what could she do? Had technology outside the island moved on without her? Were there women plugging and unplugging day in and day out in Chicago or New York or LA? Where would she go? It had been 100 years on an island and nothing had changed. Not much, not really. People were born, then they left or died, which was to say the same thing.
That hairline fracture, one at a time. It's like that drizzle that she talks about later in the book. It's not the torrential downpour that gets you, right? Because you run out of that, you take your clothes off, and that's it. It's that drizzle.
It's the little, yeah,
that stays, and it stays on your clothes, and it moves its way into your lungs, and that's the thing, and that you feel it in that paragraph, and then later she says it again, and it's these little insistent moments of those hairline fractures that really show us what that's like. I have just a few more questions, and I just want to remind people to click the tab below and add questions as we go, because after these few questions that I have for you, we'll open it up, and I'll start bringing questions in from the people that are watching us. So it's just right there below, ask a question, and I'll take from there after. But so what I now this is like a, you know, a more pragmatic writerly question here, but what was the journey of publishing this book? Of, you know, how long did it take, and how long did it take to write, and then what was the journey of actual publication? Was it hard to put out there? Did you find someone immediately? What was that like?
So yes, I found someone immediately, and no, I didn't find someone immediately. So first of all, it didn't take very long to write. A lot of the stories that ended up in the novel were originally a couple of them were short stories, and you know, originally I had in mind a collection. So in a sense, yes, it took a very long time to write because the short stories were written in the 90s. And, you know, a lot of things happened to me in the 90s. Those were very good years. And so I started writing the short stories in the 90s. I think the late 90s or early 2000s, something like that. And, you know, and then set them aside. And so, you know, many years went by, and then I went back to it. But the actual writing of the novel didn't take me very much. I was very consistent. I wrote every single day for fear that if I stepped away, I would lose the thread and I would lose that momentum and emotional, psychological force that I wanted to sort of, you know, bring to the book. And so I wrote very quickly every day, in the morning, at night, until all hours of the night. I think I had a manuscript, you know, in some kind of shape, but a manuscript nonetheless. In about 6 or 7 months, I was a visiting professor at Cal Poly Pomona at the time, so I was teaching a full load and whatever that means, and with the kids. But I was very disciplined and had a manuscript. And so after that, I was lucky, I suppose. Stanford University Press had come to UCLA, and they were also looking at my book manuscript, my dissertation to book manuscript. And a dear friend mentioned that I had just finished a novel, and the editor became very interested for their new trade imprint.
Huh.
What ended up happening is that there really was no fiction writer at the time, and so they were sending the novel out to reviewers in much the same way that you send out an academic book.
Oh.
And so, you know, we parted ways, and in the meantime, I was looking for an agent and all of these things that you're supposed to do when you write a novel, right? Look for an agent, try to find an agent. And, you know, I had many hits, and everyone asked for, you know, after the first 50, you turn in your first 50 pages, and then they want to see the rest, or you turn in the first 3 chapters, whatever it is. And it would always come back in the same way, you know, beautiful prose, you know, they love the prose. It didn't feel like Cuba to them, you know, and I got a lot of that, and which wasn't surprising, right? It's not the Cuba that sells. You know, this is not a book you read at the beach. You can, I would. You can take it to the beach, but it's not a beach read per se, right? And so, you know, you have to do what you did, which is, you know, annotate and really get into the book and the many sort of Easter eggs that I put in there for the lovely reader. And so I think it wasn't as it didn't lend itself to the market as they would have wanted to. And it's interesting that you mentioned earlier about the musicality of the prose, or that there is music in spite of the fact that this is not a book about music. Because one of the comments was, you know, Cubans are such musical people. I just came from Cuba. Why don't you have, you know, the Cubans enjoying music? Of course, this is not, you know, a book about Buena Vista Social Club. It's about something else. So, you know, I came up against these different narratives about Cuba, and the story I was telling didn't really fit. Even when it was, for example, when it may have been an agency that was already representing other Latinx writers, that I would have thought would have been a little bit more sensitive to the story. It didn't work out. So after that, you know, it was for 2 years. It was with two different presses, and the two One year, as it was getting closer, one of the editors requested the novel. It was very close, and then unfortunately she had to leave to take care of her mother. A new editor came in who inherited the novel. Another year of waiting, and the same thing happened with the other one. Finally, I started submitting again, and then there was this wonderful press from Virginia, and they loved the book. They understood it, they got it, and that's who I went with, and that was Precocious Press. And they're a very small press. They have been amazing, super supportive, and allowed me to. I was mentioning this to you the other day. I'm a hands-on kind of person, and if it's my project, I want everything about it to be my vision in many ways, and so. Why would it be any different with a book? And so I wanted to have a say on what the book would look like and feel like, and all of that to the tiniest detail, as much as we could, right? And they indulged me in that, and I love them for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for this book, because I know how hard these things are to publish, and I know that response very well. This is Cuba. What Cuba is this? I don't know this Cuba.
Exactly.
Yes. But let's take some questions that are showing up, and they're great questions. One of them is about why you decided to write this novel in English and whether it would have been any different in Spanish.
Yes, it would have been an entirely different novel in Spanish, and this is why I started translating it. I translated the first 2 chapters, and I abandoned the project because by the end of the 3rd chapter, I was going to go a different route. If it were in Spanish, absolutely, the characters would speak differently. This was a novel that in my mind I already had to translate, so it has already gone through the process of translation. By the mere fact that this is a story that really takes place in Spanish, and I've decided to write it in English. So yes, it would be, I think, in my hands, it would be a different story, slightly different, because the characters would speak differently, and I would have to respond to that, to speak to that truth about them.
One of the things that I love about the fact that is in English is that it is starting to build that bridge of here's the difference, here's where people think Cuba is, and here's where it actually is. Let's start. And the only way to really do that is to actually speak the language, like bring it across, even though it feels like Spanish, like it's Spanish and English in English. Let's see another question here. This is more of a comment, but Susanna, your beautiful reading of Maria's Disenchantment brings to mind Langston Hughes's poem Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? For Maria and Elio, does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or does it explode?
Yeah.
What about,
I love that poem. I love that poem. It does not dry up like a raisin in the sun, nor does it explode. I think there's another way here, and Elio tries to find that way. It disperses, maybe. It doesn't necessarily explode, and if it does, it's in a very quiet way, in the same way that we were talking about those hairline fractures, right? The explosion is quiet, and it's in the wrinkles of their faces, and the way that the face, as Ellie was saying earlier, the face kind of collapses. So it's a very interior kind of explosion and implosion of sorts.
It's interesting because it makes me think of, the moment where he's riding down the hill and the bicycle's like, it's like, it's going to happen.
And he was so hopeful. He's so hopeful. Yeah.
Let's see. Did you write a whole draft first until the end, or did you go back and rewrite the first chapters as you went along? That's question 1 of this 2-part question. The book is very visual. This is number 2, but the prose is also so lyrical. What comes to you first, the images or the words? So there's 2 there, images or words, and then how you wrote it.
So how I wrote it, I wanted I had the end always. I knew what the end would be, so I wanted to get to the end. So I wrote with the end in mind, and I'm someone who really I can't have pending projects. I need to see it through to the end. I need to see the story through to the end, like Maria says, right? You stick to your story and you see it to the end. And so I wrote to the end. What I would do, if I was having a hard day, then I would write in the morning, and then maybe at night I would revise what I wrote. That worked for a while. I have the tendency to reread. I don't know how you work, Vanessa, but I have the tendency to reread up to the moment where I'm going to write something new. And so for a while that worked. If I was on the 4th chapter, but by the time I'm getting to 300 pages, then, that's a problem, because it would take me a couple days to get through so that I would come once again to the moment that I needed to write about. Yes. I wanted to get to the end. So that's to answer the first question. So I would try to avoid revising as much as possible, but that usually doesn't happen. I want to see it clean and sort of sharp, right before I write something new. And then as far as what comes first, the image or the words, the image. And I'm an English as a second language individual, right? So I learned English later in life. So my trouble has always been, and I was an artist first before I started writing, probably because the image does come first. And also because I was stuck in this in-between world. I didn't have a real mastery of Spanish, at an early age. And I was still starting to learn English. So I was not in a position to write anything yet. I was sort of taking things in. So yes, I think that the image, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the image does come first. And then I'm freaking out trying to find the words right, to create and build the image, but the image comes first. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there's nothing like I know you write in multiple mediums, but there's nothing like a novel to put you in that position. Right. You must create the entire world, Right. I didn't know that you started out as a visual artist. Yeah, visual artist. I still do. I worked for Mattel for a while, for Barbie mainline and Disney, and wow. Yeah. So look, I have one comment here that I will read for you. The book was a wonderful way of engaging you. The book has a wonderful way of engaging you from page 1. As you read, the images of the story become so real, you feel immersed into it. It's an amazing read. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Rita Barrios. I'm going to read you one because it might be someone you know, and these are fun. Virginia de los Reyes says, "Saludos, ¿incluyes la angustia de algún balsero en alta mar?" Bueno, la angustia de un balsero en alta mar es la angustia de todos, right? So, yes, there is the angustia de un balsero en alta mar. Absolutely. The anguish of a rafter in. Yeah. In the high seas. Yeah. In the high seas. In the high seas. Yeah. Yeah. We won't say how or when, but it also just being Cuban. Yeah. So I think there's no more questions, but I think I'll wrap up just by asking you, what's next? So that's such pressure. So I have a lot of things that are next. A lot of things are always next. So I'm working on the introduction of something that I should have submitted 10 years ago, and that is the translation of Lydia Cabrera's short stories, selected short stories, which are already translated. The intro is kind of rough, so I'm working on that. And then I have a second novel that I started a while back called Letters from Camus, which takes place in Paris, Cuba, Algeria, and has Albert Camus as some kind of character in it. And then there's a musical that I wrote a bit ago. It's called Nocturno, and it celebrates the show Nocturno that ran in Cuba from August 6, 1966 until I think it's still going. And
it uses the wonderful songs of Nocturno from the 60s and 70s as the kind of backdrop and way that the characters express themselves. It's in the works, and I won't say the date, so we don't jinx anything, but it's coming very soon to a place near you in Miami, and hopefully everything will work out well. And it's under the direction of your good friend Victoria Collado, and musical direction by Jesse Sanchez, who was the musical director for Hamilton, the national tour, and then under George Cabrera, Trifeo's production. So I'm super excited about that. It's a story that's also very close to my heart. It also takes place in Bauta, of course. And of course, we've had enough stories from Havana. And so I'm super excited. It's Nocturno was a radio station that I think many people grew up listening to, or their parents grew up listening to. I inherited it from my parents. And they fell in love to, they divorced to, they came of age to these songs from Nocturno. And at the time when there was nothing else, and we see this in the novel, there was a little window. Nocturno was a little window to the outside world, and so people waited for Nocturno to come on at 8 p.m. and then again I think it came on at 10 or 11. And it was wonderful and magical, and so hopefully the show will be that as well, especially right now in the time of COVID.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that, because I think there's something about the audio and radio world that we're feeling right now in this moment of isolation, that there is that sort of hope in that realm. It's all around us. We can dive in and we can do it together somehow, even though we're not in the same room.
Right.
So there's something really beautiful to that, and I think we'll end it there. And I'm just really grateful to have been here talking to you today. And Jorge, if you have anything else to add, otherwise.
Well, I had another broader question, but I think we don't have the time to address it, which is Susanna's interest in Moorish and sort of Arab, Middle Eastern topics, and how that fascinates her. Is that in this novel at all, or no?
That is not in this novel at all, but that is in the Letters from Camus. That's another novel, Jorge. That's the next one. That's the next one. So the next novel takes place in these three different places, so Paris, Cuba, Algeria, and it has to do with the North African North African-Cuban relationship and the inheritance of these letters from Albert Camus.
Okay, looking forward to that. So I guess it's my job now then to thank you again, Susanna and Vanessa, for this very lively conversation. I think at some point I felt like you were in my living room talking to each other, and I'm sure the rest of the audience did. Yeah, it's a great experience. So let me remind the audience again to please support our favorite bookstore in Miami, Books and Books, and by buying the novel online, or you can just actually go and in person, and it'll be there. So thank you all for being here. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.